Hey guys, Bicebump here, bringing you this Unholy Death Knight Raid Advanced Rotation Guide. This is a follow-up from my Unholy Beginner video, where we're going to essentially cover everything that we didn't talk about in the previous video, which is what takes you from going, 85, 90% to 100% there. I will try and share with you all the tips and tricks I use in a raid environment to maximize my DPS and just make my rotation the most efficient possible. There are 5 topics we're going to cover today, and they are Wound Equilibrium and Rotten Touch. We're going to look at Race Abomination and Wound Pressure. We also have some Cooldown Management. We do look at Pet Position. That's actually something that matters now. And finally, we're going to talk about Burst AoE and how we maximize that. Anyway, starting out, we have Wound Equilibrium and Rotten Touch, and this is essentially the advanced bit of your very standard single target rotation. As you very much know, we have Festive Strike to build wounds, we have Skirt Strike to burst them, and we use Death Call to use up the runing power. However, we must always ask ourselves, what kind of wound count should we be looking at, and how do we actually play around it? As a general rule, we have 2 things that we don't want to go to the maximum, which is 6, and the minimum, which is 0. Our pet will randomly apply wounds to our target with infected claws. This means that if you ever go to 6 and the pet applies a wound, that's just going to get lost and wasted. This means that we should never try and go to 6, because that means we could potentially waste wounds, which means we waste DPS in the end. Furthermore, we don't want to go to 0 because we have Sudden Doom procs. And Sudden Doom procs means that your Death Call will burst a wound when you use it. If you go down to 0 and use a Death Call with Sudden Doom, you're also going to waste a potential wound burst there, which is also something we don't want to do. This will still happen, and you can quite easily play around it, because if you go down to 0, you get a Sudden Doom proc, just simply hit Festive Strike before, so you actually generate a wound and then burst it. So that's not as important. But going to 6 is a pretty big no-no, because then you will potentially waste wounds without having to. There's no counterplay essentially. Now we should talk about this as well in the context of Rotten Touch. So Rotten Touch is quite regularly picked up in most builds where you want to maximize our single target. Whenever you use a Sudden Doom proc and Death Call, it gives you a 10-second debuff on the enemy, which increases the damage of your Skirt Strike and Claw Shadows by 50% for that duration. Now, essentially, the ideal scenario is that you never press Skirt Strike or Claw Shadows without Rotten Touch on the enemy. It's not possible to quite do it that well, but you can definitely play around it to increase the numbers of Skirt Strike and Claw Shadows you use with Rotten Touch on. The idea is the following, right? In general gameplay, you get lots of Sudden Doom procs and you have no issue keeping Rotten Touch up, but there will be periods of unlucky streaks where you won't get Sudden Doom and your Rotten Touch will end up dropping. When your Rotten Touch ends up dropping, what you want to do is give you freedom to use other spells that isn't Skirt Strike or Claw Shadows until you get a proc and can therefore use Death Call. The idea is therefore that when your Rotten Touch is about to run out, so if you see, there's 5 seconds left, 4 seconds, something like that, it's a good idea to go low on your wound count. So go down to 1. We do this because when Rotten Touch eventually drops, it gives you room to use Festive Strike once, maybe even twice if you get unlucky with the number of wounds you get, and that gives you a lot of time to get the proc on its own, which means that you can use your Sudden Doom and then use your Skirt Strike and Claw Shadows again. That's the kind of general idea. Essentially, if you look at it from a bit of a simple point of view, when Rotten Touch is up, you go down on wounds to 1. When it drops, you go up with wounds again, just to give you that extra time to get the free proc. This is something I have a look at when I play. When I do a pure single target and I can focus a lot on my rotation, I will keep track of my Rotten Touch. Whenever it drops, I try and delay using Skirt Strike and Claw Shadows as long as possible. However, you shouldn't end up in scenarios where you just Festive Strike when you're at 5 wounds or something, right? You should still very clearly follow the rule of don't Festive Strike if you're at 4 or more wounds, right? And also don't overcap on runing power, so you can use Death Call as well. But yeah, if you do this properly and you follow my advice here, you're going to give yourself enough time to get the Sudden Doom proc and then get to it with your Skirt Strikes and Claw Shadows. This is a bit true in the opener as well. I tend to use a Festive Strike relatively early if I don't get a Sudden Doom proc. because I know I'm going to be spamming Scourge Strike difficult at start, so it's much better that I actually use a single Festering Strike to give myself time to get the Sun Doom proc, so I can then use the Scourge Strike, or the difficult with the Sun Doom, and buff up my Scourge Strike. This kind of brings you up into the next topic, which is Race Abomination and Wound Pressure. And this is applicable whenever you use Race Abomination, but primarily in the opener. One of the big advantages of Race Abomination is that it automatically applies wounds to your target, which means that you can essentially drop Festering Strike. We don't use it nearly as much in the opener sequence, and this is good because it means you get much more Festamite stacks, and Scourge Strike is just a much stronger button to press than Festering Strike. When in the opener, you should be very careful to not go too high on wounds, because you can very quickly end up overcapping. Your Race Abomination, every time it auto attacks, it applies the wounds. Dark Transformation as well, or sorry, just your pet in general would also apply wounds. So if you Festering Strike, like if you're at 2 and you Festering Strike, you go to 5, or might even go to, oh, you might go to 4 or 5. Quickly, you get an auto from the Race Abomination, gives you to 6, and then you really quickly end up in territory where you're going to waste wounds. So it's a good idea to maybe use one Festering Strike at the start, but you then want to keep your wounds low during that opener sequence, so you risk actually getting overcapping happening. In simple terms, like, use a single Festering Strike, and then it's just going to be Scourge Strike and Death Calls from there until you go down to 0 when you're going to Festering Strike back up again. But that generally won't happen because the pet is going to apply so many wounds. Alright, next up is Cooldown Management. Not too much to discuss here, but I just want to essentially emphasize the importance of using cooldowns when they come up. A very big factor when I look at people's logs and why they're not doing sufficient damage is because they're not actually pressing cooldowns as soon as they come up. It might take them 3, 4, 5, 10 seconds even when you delay cooldowns. What that ends up doing is that in the end of the fight, you might actually have used your cooldowns one less time than you could have. And that's going to be a huge difference in terms of DPS. So just to emphasize, your cooldowns, they all match up, except Abomination Limb, but that really doesn't matter if you use them as soon as they come up. So do make sure to do that so you get the maximum amount of users throughout the fight. Alright, on to one of the more advanced topics here, which is pet positioning and Dark Transformation. A number of fights in this tier have really bursty AoE, where ads spawn and then get killed in very few amount of seconds. Now, we spread diseases by either using Outbreak, which is a GCD ability, or by pressing Dark Transformation and having your pet applied for 6 seconds afterwards. Due to how quickly these pets die, the ads die, it is really important that you're as GCD efficient as possible. Like, the ideal play is for the dots to be applied to the ads automatically through Dark Transformation, and then you spend every single GCD after that point just spamming Epidemic. If you spend a GCD pressing Outbreak to dot up the ads, that's going to be a big DPS loss. Because that's, you know, maybe you have 3 or 4 Epidemics on the ads, and it's going to be like 25% or 33% of your total damage is being lost due to having to press that button. Now, how to play around this is to use pet positioning. You can move your main pet by using, there's a little thing on the action bar, or you can do /pet move to, I think is the command. And you can move the pet to the position you want it to be, so that when you hit Dark Transformation and add spawn, you will actually dot them up immediately. Unfortunately, on a lot of bosses, the pet sits at the back of the boss, which is not where the ads spawn, so you do actually have to actively move it around to where you want it to be. Some good examples here is for Queen Anzarek. You do the webs, you stand in front of the boss, which is far away from where your pet is. So you actually want to go ahead and move your pet to the front and then press Dark Transformation where it kind of aligns so that you can get the dots for free. Same thing in Rashanan, the ads spawn far away from the boss, so you need to move your pet there. And finally, I think those are the 2 main ones, but there are also cases where this is actually useful. To note, once you move your pet to the position, you don't want to leave him there, so make sure you actually put him back on follow when he's actually moved to the right spot and you have dotted up the ads, and also make sure that he's attacking your current target by using a pet attack. A couple of extra keybinds there, you need 3, pet move to, pet follow, and you need to actually do the pet attack to make sure it actually doesn't end up stuck anywhere. But that is what you're going to need to be more efficient. I don't personally play around with this, but that's definitely something I'm going to try and improve on to make sure I can actually do much better burst DPS. Finally, on this topic, how do we do burst AoE and why does it matter in the raid? As I said, lots of cases where there are ads spawning which will die in just a couple of GCDs, and if you want to maximize your damage and get a good log, you really need to get a lot of damage into those ads. The first thing we need to cover is using GCD kind of wasting abilities before the ads spawn, because they last throughout them. Abomination Limb, you want to press that before the ads spawn, because that's not a button you want to press when they're out. When they're out, the only single button you want to press is essentially Epidemic. Or Skirt Strike when you're running the Bursty Source build on the Brood guy. Anyway, you also want to use Deafen Decay before. That lasts for 14 seconds. Don't wear the GCD when the ads are up by using Deafen Decay. Use it beforehand so you have both Abomination Limb and Deafen Decay and Dark Transformation as well, right? Everything, use that before so that when it spawns, they're dotted up automatically through Dark Transformation and you can just spam Epidemic or do whatever thing else you want to do big burst damage. For instance, on Brood, when you run your Bursty Source and Vile Contagion, which you do on Mythic, you really want to make sure that everything is up and running so that when the ads spawn and grip together, you can just Vile Contagion and then just spam Skirt Strike to do big AoE damage. It's a bit petty to talk about this, but it's just the nature of logs that you have to be efficient when it comes to burst AoE to do well. Another little tip, I think this is just a couple ones I talked about, but the second boss, you can actually use Outbreak on the boss to dot up all the ads. It works with the kind of hitbox of the boss, means that even though they're really quite far away, you get the dot, which is just free dot damage. Alright, so that's the advanced Unholy guide. I know this didn't really cover like the base of the spec menu that way, but this is essentially used to add on top of someone that knows how to play the spec and just needs to bring it that extra bit forward so you can get your rank ones, right? That is what this is used for, and hopefully it can help you to improve your logs. Leave a comment down below, let me know what you thought about this video, upvote, downvote, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you very much for watching, bye bye.